I needed a car, something simple. I had planned a quick trip through some small towns, visiting a few clients, nothing more than that. I rented the vehicle from a modest agency, one of those places tucked away in commercial areas, almost invisible to anyone rushing by. I wasn't expecting luxury, just a reliable means of transportation. The car they offered me seemed perfect. It was a silver sedan, a recent model, spotless and without scratches. The feeling of hitting the road in such a car was almost relaxing. That fresh scent of new air conditioning mixed with the smell of cleanliness. I grabbed the keys, and as soon as I placed my hand on the steering wheel, everything felt in order. The road was clear, and the car glided smoothly. There were no signs anything could go wrong. Deep down, I tried to ignore the growing discomfort, but anyone who travels alone through isolated places knows how the mind can play tricks. My thoughts wandered as the miles passed. A lot was bothering me. Piled up work, tight deadlines, and the fact that I was alone on this trip didn't help shake the nagging feeling that something was off. I drove for hours without stopping. The only thing distracting me was the music on the radio. The stations changed frequently, and the signal quality was terrible. I finally turned off the radio and embraced the silence. The sun was starting to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. The scenery had a certain charm, and the idea of arriving at the hotel began to lift my spirits. Maybe all I needed was a good night's rest. It was at that moment I heard the first strange sound. Something subtle, a muffled noise coming from somewhere in the car. It sounded like something was rattling, as if something was loose in the trunk. At first, I didn't think much of it. I was tired and probably imagining things. I kept driving, trying to focus on the road. The sound persisted. Now, it seemed clearer, like something was gently tapping against the sides of the trunk with every turn or brake. The unease grew. I could no longer ignore it. I was alone on that deserted road, and the last gas station had been over an hour behind me. I decided that when I found a safe place, I would pull over to check what was happening. Another hour passed before I spotted a small stop by the roadside, one of those poorly lit convenience stores that look like they came out of old horror movies. I parked the car near the closest streetlight, turned off the engine, and prepared to get out. Night had fallen completely, and the darkness felt suffocating. I opened the car door, and the cold night air hit me. I walked over to the trunk, my heart racing for no apparent reason. When I unlocked and lifted the lid, I was met only by emptiness. There was nothing inside. Not a forgotten bag, not a single thing that could have caused that sound. Just the clean, immaculate spaces of the trunk. For a moment, I felt foolish. I closed the lid and took a deep breath, trying to shake off the growing tension. I went back to the car, settled into the seat, and started the engine. That strange feeling still lingered, but I decided to ignore it and continue my journey. The store seemed closed with no one around, so there was no reason to waste any more time there. However, as I resumed my drive, something began to bother me again. It was a smell. At first, it was faint, almost imperceptible. A metallic, acidic odor that I couldn't immediately identify. I had checked the trunk, right? There was nothing there. But the smell persisted, growing stronger by the minute. I glanced in the rearview mirror, trying to identify where it was coming from. My mind was starting to conjure up absurd theories. What if there was something in the car that I hadn't noticed? Maybe hidden in a way that wouldn't be easily detected. The thought troubled me, but I tried to push it away. I continued driving, my mind now wrapped up in this minor mystery, while the road ahead seemed to stretch infinitely. The headlights sliced through the darkness like blades, revealing only brief stretches of road ahead before being swallowed again by the night. I was tired, but something kept me from fully relaxing. When I finally spotted the hotel sign, an immediate sense of relief washed over me. I was exhausted, both physically and mentally, and just wanted to get out of that car. The hotel was simple, but it seemed welcoming. I parked the car and quickly got out, eager for a comfortable bed. However, as I closed the car door, the smell hit me hard again, making me recoil. I entered the hotel still unsettled, but determined to ignore it. I grabbed my key, headed up to my room, and collapsed on the bed without even taking off my shoes. My mind continued to wander around that strange odor and the sound that, somehow, kept echoing in my ears. But fatigue overcame me, and within minutes, I fell into a deep sleep. I woke in the middle of the night with a sense of discomfort. The room was cold, very cold. Even though the heater was on, I turned in bed, trying to shake off the sleep, but restlessness took hold of me. The smell returned to my mind, stronger than ever. I could almost feel it in the room. It didn't make sense. The car was outside in the garage. How could it affect me now? I I sat up in bed and decided I wouldn't be able to sleep again. I got dressed and went down to the reception, thinking about asking for something warm to drink. When I arrived, the receptionist looked surprised to see me awake at that hour. "Do you need something?" she asked. "I'm not sure, just maybe hot water." "I'm feeling a bit uncomfortable," I replied, trying to sound casual, even though I was far from feeling at ease. She looked at me for a moment, hesitant, before stepping out to fetch what I had asked for. While I waited, I glanced out the glass window next to the entrance. The parking lot was empty, except for my car. That silver sedan seemed harmless under the dim light of the street lamps. However, a strange shadow formed around it, as if the lights couldn't fully illuminate it. Something was wrong with that car. Was I letting my fatigue and disruption of routine make me paranoid? Maybe that was it. I took a sip of the hot water, which flowed down my throat with a comforting sensation, but the discomfort didn't dissipate. I decided to return to my room, but sleep eluded me. Like an irritating shadow, I tossed and turned in bed, my gaze fixed on the dark ceiling. The clock on the nightstand read 3 in the morning, a time that usually left me utterly exhausted, yet I remained awake, oscillating between thoughts of work and that growing sense of something being wrong. Occasionally my eyes drifted back to the window. Deep down, I knew the reason for my insomnia wasn't work or fatigue. It was the car. I lay down on the bed, covering myself completely with the sheet, trying to create a physical barrier against the mounting tension spreading through my body. The room was silent, except for the soft hum of the heater. For a moment, I began to relax, but then I heard the sound again, a faint, muffled noise. It was the same sound I'd heard earlier on the road, and now it was there, clear and unmistakable. It came from the car, even though it was parked several meters away. That didn't make sense. I sat up in bed, my heart racing. I took a deep breath, trying to convince myself that it was just my mind playing tricks. But the sound continued. It was as if something was moving inside the trunk, something small and constant, brushing against the sides. Without thinking much, I got up and dressed quickly. I couldn't ignore it. I needed to find out what was happening. I grabbed the car key and headed down the hotel stairs towards the parking lot. Feeling the cold air of the early morning envelop me, the silence around me seemed amplified, as if the world was caught in a state of waiting, just watching. The car was exactly where I had left it, but something felt off about it. The light from the lamp seemed unable to penetrate fully, as if the car absorbed the darkness around it. I approached slowly, fingers gripping the key tightly in my pocket. I felt ridiculous, as if I were overreacting to something that had no rational explanation. But the smell returned, even stronger now. It was that metallic odor, mixed with something I couldn't identify, something rotten, like decomposing flesh. When I finally reached the car, I hesitated before opening the trunk again. A part of me knew I wouldn't find anything different, but the other part, the part clinging to the last shred of logic, needed to be sure. I turned the key, and with a soft click, the trunk popped open. I lifted the lid, and once again, there was nothing inside. But the smell was stronger than ever, as if it were embedded in the fabric of the car, like an open wound poorly healed. I quickly closed the trunk and stepped back, running a hand over my face as I tried to comprehend what was happening. It was then that something caught my attention. Across the parking lot, someone was watching me. It was a figure, indistinct, half hidden in the shadows. My eyes narrowed, trying to focus, but the person didn't move. They just stood there, motionless. A chill ran down my spine. Who could it be? Someone from the hotel? Someone who had been following me? With a surge of courage, I took a few steps toward the figure, but as soon as I got closer, it vanished as if it had never been there. The cold wind of the early morning blew, and for a moment, I stood frozen in place, feeling as if I were being watched from some invisible spot. I turned quickly and headed back to the hotel. Exhaustion was affecting me more than I wanted to admit, and my mind was clearly playing tricks on me. When I entered the lobby, I found the receptionist looking at me with an expression that mixed curiosity with what seemed like concern. "Are you okay?" she asked, tilting her head slightly. "Yeah, I just couldn't sleep, so I went for a walk," I lied, trying not to appear more disturbed than I already was. She simply nodded, though her eyes showed that she didn't completely believe me. I returned to my room, locking the door behind me. I was exhausted, but sleep felt further away than ever. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the distorted reflection in the window. What was wrong with that car? I began to question whether I was truly becoming paranoid or if something more was happening. Each time I closed my eyes, the sound of the car echoed back to my mind. The faint, almost imperceptible thumping from inside the trunk, as if something were trying to get out. Finally, fatigue overcame me and I fell into a restless sleep. I dreamed of the car, the smell of indistinct figures watching me from a distance. In the dream, I tried to open the trunk again, but something held me back. There was an invisible weight on it, a presence that didn't want to be discovered. I woke up to the sound of knocking at the door. My body jolted upright, muscles tense and my mind still foggy from sleep. I got up and looked through the peephole. It was the receptionist. Her eyes were anxious, and she seemed uncomfortable. I opened the door slowly. "You have a call at the front desk," she said, with a serious tone that didn't match the early hour. "They said it's urgent." I was confused. Who would call me this early? I glanced at the clock by the bed. It was 5:30 in the morning. I descended the stairs, still dazed, and made my way to the front desk. The receptionist handed me the phone, but when I put the receiver to my ear, the other side was silent. I waited a few seconds and tentatively repeated, "Hello?" Nothing. I hung up the phone and looked at the receptionist, who appeared equally perplexed. "Who called?" I asked. She shrugged. "They didn't say, just asked for you to be called. I thought it was important." I thanked her and returned to my room, more confused than before. This day needed to end soon. But before I could recover from the call, my cell phone began to vibrate. I grabbed the device and looked at the screen. An unknown number. I answered quickly, anxiety swelling in my chest. "Hello?" On the other end, a low, grave voice responded. "Are you still with it?" I fell silent, confused. "With what?" The line went quiet for a second, and the voice repeated, "With the car. Are you still with the car?" My heart raced. Whoever it was knew I had rented that car. Before I could respond, the call dropped. My fingers trembled as I tried to redial, but the number was no longer available. My heart still pounding, I attempted to call back. Nothing. That damn number was unavailable. A tense silence filled the room as I stared at my phone, unable to process what had just happened. Who could know about the car? Why would anyone care? It was just a rental, a silver sedan, like any other. But something about that car felt different, and the voice on the phone sent an unbearable chill down my spine. I abruptly got up from the bed and began pacing back and forth. The small room seemed to close in around me, as if the walls were suffocating me. I needed to think. I needed to understand what was happening. But with each step, the smell returned to my mind, stronger and more unbearable than ever. It was as if the odor were ingrained in my skin, in my clothes, as if there were no escape. I was on the brink of a breakdown, with incoherent thoughts and conflicting feelings. My head throbbed from exhaustion, and every time I tried to find some logic, it slipped away like sand between my fingers. The only constant was the car, and the damned muffled sound that now echoed in my mind like a drumbeat. Something was inside, something I hadn't seen yet. I grabbed the car keys off the nightstand, determined to put an end to this once and for all. I quickly descended the stairs of the hotel, not even bothering with the receptionist or anything else. When I reached the parking lot, the cold morning air hit my face like a slap. The car was there, parked in the same spot, silent and seemingly harmless. But I knew it wasn't quite that simple. I walked over to the vehicle, my footsteps echoing on the still damp asphalt of the early morning. I took a deep breath and, with a quick motion, opened the trunk. Nothing. It was still empty. But the smell, that damn smell, was stronger than ever. It was almost as if it had seeped into the very walls of the car, as if each fiber of the upholstery had absorbed the rot. I ran my hands along the edges of the trunk, searching for something that might be hidden, a small opening, a flaw in the lining, anything that could explain the odor. My fingers moved quickly, feeling every corner of the space, until finally I felt something. It was a small bump in the upholstery, nearly imperceptible. I pressed harder, and to my surprise, the area gave slightly. I pulled at the edge, and a small secret door revealed itself beneath the trunk lining. I froze. There it was. What looked like a hidden compartment, something I'd never expect to find in an ordinary car. It was narrow, but deep enough to hold something. The weak light of the rising sun didn't allow me to see what was inside, so I took my phone and illuminated the space with the flashlight. Inside the compartment was a small, thick black plastic bag, tightly secured with duct tape. My stomach churned, and my heart began to race so hard, I thought it might leap out of my chest. My hand trembled as I pulled the bag out. It was heavy, much heavier than I expected for its size. I set it down on the ground beside the car and stood there for a few seconds, trying to gather the courage to open it. Every cell in my body screamed for me to leave it alone, to call the police, to walk away from the car. But something stronger, a mix of curiosity and fear, urged me to push on. With a swift motion, I tore the duct tape off the bag. The horrible smell I'd sensed since the night before exploded into the air, making me recoil in disgust and horror. For a moment, I was breathless, trying to process what lay before me. Inside the bag was a significant amount of raw meat, or at least, that's what it seemed at first glance. But as the light from my phone illuminated it better, I realized it wasn't ordinary meat. The pieces were small, irregular, as if they had been cut carelessly, almost with contempt. My hands began to shake uncontrollably when one part revealed itself. A human finger. Panic washed over me. What was this? What was it doing inside the car? I stumbled back, trying to understand what was happening. This car was not ordinary, and now I knew that for sure. Whoever had used it before me had used it to transport something, or someone, that should never have been found. My thoughts raced in circles. I needed to think fast. The first logical reaction would be to call the police. But what if there were implications for me? I had been alone with this car for days. No one would know I wasn't involved. And besides, that voice on the phone, the persistent question about the car, someone knew where I was. Someone was waiting for this. I quickly closed the bag, pushing it back into the hidden compartment and covering it with the lining. I felt nauseous, the odor still lingering in my nostrils, and the image of that finger haunting me every time I closed my eyes. I couldn't stay there. I needed to leave as quickly as possible. I closed the trunk and got into the car, my hands shaking as I turned the key in the ignition. The engine roared to life, and I drove out of the parking lot without looking back. Fear consumed me. My mind was racing, considering all the possibilities. What if there were more bodies? What if I was being followed? What if, somehow, I was involved in something bigger? I drove aimlessly through the deserted streets of the small town. Everything felt out of place, as if the world had lost its balance. My thoughts stumbled over each other, trying to find a way out, an explanation. But all I could think about was that secret compartment, the plastic bag, the human finger. That's when my phone vibrated again, an unknown number. I answered, my hand shaking and my stomach churning. Hello? The same deep voice from before. Are you still with it? My heart stopped. They knew. What? My voice came out trembling, almost a whisper. The car, the bag, you found it, didn't you? The voice sounded calm, cold, as if none of this was out of the ordinary. Who are you? I demanded, though my voice lacked the firmness I wanted. The person on the other end laughed, a low and frightening sound. It doesn't matter who I am. What matters is that now you're involved. Take the car to the address I'm going to send you. And maybe, just maybe, we can forget that you touched something you shouldn't have. I hung up before he could continue. My heart was racing, my mind spinning with confusion and fear. I was now trapped in something much bigger than a simple car rental. I trembled uncontrollably as I ended the call. My heart pounded in my chest so violently that I felt like I might faint at any moment. Thoughts raced through my mind, searching for a way out. Who was that person? What did they want from me? And why were they so calm, so sure that I would do exactly what they asked? Deep down, I knew I was cornered. I had touched it. I had seen what was inside the bag. Now, any hope of returning to my normal life felt like an illusion. If I didn't follow their instructions, what would happen? Would I be hunted? And if I delivered the car as they asked, would that be enough to end everything? Or would I be discarded, just like those anonymous victims whose remains were in that horrible bag? My body acted before my mind could process the decisions. I started the car and, without thinking, drove out of the city, heading down the deserted road. I needed space. I needed air. The houses quickly disappeared, and the darkness around me seemed to close in, the headlights slicing through the thick shadows like blades. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that the knuckles turned white. My phone buzzed again, interrupting my chaotic thoughts. A message had arrived, causing my stomach to churn. I grabbed the device, keeping an eye on the road. The message was brief and clear. A location, GPS coordinates. The place wasn't far. It was some kind of warehouse or storage facility in an industrial area outside the city. Just empty streets and old abandoned depots. Should I go? There were no guarantees they would let me leave after I dropped off the car. But refusing didn't seem like an option. Then, a thought struck me. Was there a chance I could get out of this if I played by their rules? At least for now? Maybe if I just did what they asked, I could find a way to escape later. Maybe, just maybe, there was a path to survive this mess. I drove without a second thought, the address marked on the GPS. The road grew increasingly desolate as I approached the coordinates. With every kilometer I traveled, the tension mounted, like a rope tightening slowly around my neck. I knew I was getting closer to something I should never have been involved in, but there was no choice now. Finally, I spotted the warehouse. It was large, old, and abandoned, its exterior walls covered in graffiti and windows shattered. The area around it was deserted, devoid of life. I parked the car at the edge of the building, turning off the engine as my hands sweated so much that it was hard to grip the keys. The silence outside was deafening. Not even the wind blew. I waited a few minutes, trying to calm my breathing, but there was no movement around me. No lights turned on, no cars appeared. Everything was dead. I decided I had to act. Sitting there wouldn't change anything. I got out of the car hesitantly, closing the door slowly to avoid making noise. I walked to the back and opened the trunk once more. The smell hit me with full force, so strong that I had to step back for a moment to avoid vomiting. The bag was still there, sealed, but it now felt like it weighed a ton. With tremendous effort, I pulled it out and placed it on the ground. I looked around, trying to identify any signs of movement, but everything remained eerily quiet. It was then that I heard footsteps behind me. I turned quickly, and there, emerging from the shadows of the warehouse, was a man. He was tall, wearing a heavy jacket and work boots that crunched the gravel beneath his feet. His face was partially obscured by a mask, but his eyes were fixed on me with an intensity that sent chills down my spine. He walked slowly toward me, and I instinctively recoiled, stumbling over my own feet. The man stopped a few meters away and glanced at the bag on the ground. A smile twisted the corners of his mouth in a disturbing way. "I told you to bring the car," he said, his voice low and controlled. I tried to speak, but the words caught in my throat. All I managed was a hesitant nod. "Now you can go," he said, still not taking his eyes off me. "But remember, you've seen too much." His voice was a veiled warning, yet he gestured for me to leave. My legs moved on their own. I turned around the car, got in quickly, and started the engine. The man was still there, watching. As I accelerated and distanced myself, I glanced in the rearview mirror, and he had vanished into the shadows of the warehouse. The road seemed infinitely long as I drove away. The adrenaline began to fade, and the reality of what had just happened seeped into my mind, drop by drop. I was free, at least for now. But what I had seen, what I had carried in that car, would never leave me. It was like a scar I would carry forever. I knew they would let me go that night, but his words echoed in my head. "You've seen too much." I tried not to think about it. I focused on the road ahead, but the images kept returning. The feel of cold, damp flesh in the bag, the horrible smell, the finger. Who was that person? Who were those people who dragged me into this macabre story? More importantly, what would they do now that they knew I was involved? I rushed back to the city as fast as I could. Upon arriving at the hotel, I couldn't sleep. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the clock. My mind was trapped in a spiral, reliving the events of the night repeatedly. Like a horror movie, I couldn't stop watching. I woke up the next day to the sound of my phone vibrating on the nightstand. The number was unknown again. With my breath caught in my throat, I answered, fearing the worst. "Good job last night," said the voice on the other end, the familiar tone dark and unsettling. "You followed the instructions. That's good." I closed my eyes, trying to push away the rising fear. "What do you want from me?" My voice came out weaker than I wanted. "Nothing. For now," the voice replied. "Consider this a warning. Don't ask questions, and don't tell anyone about what you saw. If you do, well, you know what will happen." They hung up before I could respond. I felt nauseous, as if something much bigger was approaching. Something I could not escape. I did what they asked. I returned the car, pretending nothing had happened, but I never felt truly safe. Fear became my constant companion, a shadow following me with every step, and every time the phone rang my heart raced, dreading that it would be that voice again, demanding something more from me. I don't know if they will ever show up again. But now and then, when I pass a similar car on the street, a wave of panic surges up my spine, and I wonder, will I ever truly escape? Or are they still out there, waiting, watching? What I do know is that I will never rent a car without thinking twice again, because no matter how much I return that vehicle, something from that night still follows me. And the worst part of all is the uncertainty. What else was hidden in that car? And will I ever uncover the full truth? Or will I spend the rest of my life being haunted by shadows and whispers, waiting for the next phone call that could ruin everything again? For now, all I can do is wait. It seems there's no text provided above to translate. Please provide the text you'd like me to translate, and I'll be happy to assist you. Sure. Please provide the text you'd like me to translate, and I'll be happy to help you with that. Sure. Please provide the text you'd like me to translate or adapt, and I'll be happy to help.